bancada lateral. Okay. 30 seconds more or less for us to start on the stream. Okay. Olá, muito bom dia. Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pedro Pinto, and I'm delighted to be your host today for the Outlook 2023 Clean Energy Forum, Delivery, Secure and Affordable. This is an initiative from Jornal de Negócios, Sábado, CMTV, in partnership with Galp and with the sponsorship of Toyota and Credit Montepio, also with the important support of the municipality of Oeiras. What this forum really aims to do is to place clean energy, the transition to renewable energy, at the center of the media agenda. And over the next few hours, we're delighted to be able to hear from national and international experts on this topic who are going to be able to share their insight, their experience in this landscape. It's going to be a pleasure to be able to host speeches and also discussions with a variety of experts throughout the next hours. Without any further ado, in order to kick off this forum, I'm delighted as well to welcome on stage here the Deputy Mayor of the Municipality of Oeiras, Francisco Rocha Gonçalves. Bom dia.
Thank you, Pedro. Hello, everyone. And first of all, welcome to Oeiras, to this magnificent São Julião da Barra Fort, the official residence of the our defense minister. And this is a very happy day because it is not always open for our society, so we must enjoy. The saying, "May you live in interesting times," is a phrase of good intentions immersed in the cynicism of real politics. The energy transition times we are living are no longer only interested, but they constitute an imperative demand towards safeguarding our common future. Concerning both the decarbonization of our societies and guaranteeing ability to stay competitive in our open international system and in our global society. Despite the first rule of the international system concerns its dynamic nature, it is permanently changing. Nowadays, we are facing times in which we are obligated to change in order to adapt and to stay competitive, while surviving to climate change. If we want to remain competitive in an open international system, we must find an energy mix that is able to sustain that purpose. And this purpose is a fundamental one: to protect our social model and our democratic systems. Make no doubt, if we are not able to really adapt from our dependence on fossil energies to an environmentally sustainable energy model and, at the same time, remain competitive, our democratic regimes will be open for discussion, as will be our global open society. When countries are not able to compete, they close gates, and protectionism comes. We are witnessing a war in Europe precisely because an old power became revisionist, because it is not able to compete within temporary rules. For all of these reasons, the energy transition challenge is no longer a theme for academic purpose. It is a central concern of our times. This is why the municipality of Oeiras supports initiatives like this one, like the one we are having today. We are the reference in competitiveness in our country. We have built a local economic model based in state-of-the-art knowledge and technology. We have today about 30% of the technological capacity in Portugal. We host about 10% of the Portuguese GDP. Our goal was, and still is, to create the richness that can support our social model. We want to remain competitive in years to come. I want to congratulate Jornal de Negócios, Cofina, and Galp for this electric summit. Oeiras will always be open to all of you and to receive initiatives like this one. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful journey today, and thank you, Pedro. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Francisco Rocha Gonçalves, a pleasure to have you here today, and the support is also much appreciated. We're going to get going for our first panel, and the topic will be the economics of the transition, policy, and financing strategies to accelerate and scale low-carbon technologies. Really, we're going to be delving deep into the transition that is happening and what needs to be done in order for it to become faster as far as clean and renewable energies are concerned. Now, before I give more context on our discussion, I'd like to invite our guests on stage, starting with Antonio Almeida, Principal Advisor of the Public Sector Division for Portugal of the European Investment Bank, Lee Hodder, Head of Strategy and Chief Sustainability Officer at GALP, Nelson Lage, President of the European Energy Network and ADN, and Peter Zeniewski, Energy Analyst in the Energy Supply and Investment Outlook at the International Energy Agency. If I can please ask you all to join me here on stage. All good? Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be able to discuss this topic, and whether you're an expert or not, I think it's increasingly difficult to have a week go by where the energy transition is not a matter that is discussed in the international media agenda. We know that we're living in uncertain times now when it comes to the supply of energy, the cost of energy. Depending on where you live, and let's focus on Europe for now, there is more or less hysteria regarding the public reaction to what is happening. We know the effect that the war in Ukraine has had on the continent. And we're going to discuss here really what the state of play is regarding the transition in Europe, also in Portugal, and what can be done to accelerate it, and how much our economy is still depending on fossil fuels, and they have still to rely on fossil fuels to guarantee some kind of security. Peter, I'm going to start with you. Tell us, with a slowing economy and high energy prices, global energy consumption is expected to have a small growth in 2023. How do you see next year panning out?
So I think, well, first, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a delight to be here. But I think to answer the question about next year, we need to take a step back and consider what has happened already this year. Mm-hmm. Our executive director, Fatih Birol, says that this is the first truly global energy crisis that the world is facing. And this has wider ramifications because it's a shock of unprecedented depth and complexity. We see huge amounts of increases in gas prices, mm-hmm. and this has knock-on effects on electricity prices and affordability concerns as well. And let us make no mistake that essentially some of the stresses on our supply chains have predated Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but what Russia's invasion of Ukraine has done is aggravated and considerably worsened the global energy crisis. And in that respect, the world is trying to find ways to adjust to this new reality. We, in recent days, released our World Energy Outlook, which now shows a definitive peak in fossil fuel demand this decade. And that is under conditions where governments actually act on some of the policy settings that they've put in place today. So some of these are very ambitious, especially in Europe. There are plans now to rapidly reduce natural gas demand, especially of Russian gas, and that will all more or less make fossil fuels a lower and lower share of the global energy mix. Now, a lot of that really depends on how quickly we scale up renewables. Now, the good news is that in 2022, renewable investment continued to grow globally, and we see very positive signs across a range of countries, from the United States and their Inflation Reduction Act, the European Union, the Fit for 55 and the REPowerEU plan, Japan's GX program, India and China adding new renewable goals. So everything looks positive in that respect. And we see that clean energy spending is increasing and will double by 2030. So that will sustain growth in energy demand, growth in clean energy supply chains, but we can't forget that we really still rely on fossil fuels. 80% of our energy is met by fossil fuels today, and it's really a question of whether we need to invest in new supply or whether we can scale up the clean energy required. Next year is obviously very uncertain, and I wouldn't want to speculate on exactly what will happen then, but the long-term picture is one of a peak in fossil fuels.
Well, that sets the stage very nicely, and I challenge anybody on the panel to interact directly with each other. I've got prepared questions, but feel free to interact with each other because you're the experts. Lee, a question for you regarding the challenges for the transition, taking into account the high prices and the focus on security. Do you think that these elements will slow the transition to renewables? How do you look at that?
Yes, it's a debate that we often have. I think we have to believe, and I personally believe, that this is a chance to go quicker, not slower. But okay. There is this real trilemma around security, sustainability, reliability, and the affordability. I think if I look at what's happening in the world now, clearly I fully agree with Peter that this is probably one of potentially the first of a number of energy crises that we could have on the road to net zero. My own reflection now is that we have to go as fast as we can on electrification, and I think companies like Galp and many others are doing that. But we also have to remember that right now only about 20% of our energy mix is from electrification. Even many outlooks by 2050, you're looking at still only around 50% from electrification. So the other 50% plus is around low carbon fuels. So my big passion at the moment is not only to have a massive and an accelerated growth in clean electrons from solar and wind, but also how do we use those in the most innovative ways to create new clean molecules that much of our industry and economy is built on currently. So I think that the only way to do that is to really consciously think about the accelerated renewables, but actively redirect the investments that we're making today for the other emerging value chains like hydrogen. And I think that just my final point on that would be, especially for Europe at the moment, because of the security focus that the terrible events in the Ukraine have highlighted, we have a real decision to make on how much security we want within our own borders. So do we want to reindustrialize parts of Europe and create new clean energy value chains such as hydrogen, like battery value chains, or whether we also then want to complement those with other new partnerships around the world. I think that the truth will be a mixture of anything, but it's just really a critical time to keep the pace up.
I wanted to go to Nelson because one thing is about the consumption of energy, another is about the saving of energy, and the winter is coming. And it'll be harsher for some EU member states than others. Fortunately, here in Portugal, as far as that is concerned, we're quite lucky. But talk to us about what's being prepared for the winter and who's doing it best and who is maybe finding the bigger challenges, taking into account, of course, the cut in supply that we've seen over the last months.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. Just to say that we are really experiencing the worst crisis, energy crisis in our history. That it's a crisis that is jeopardize energy security and also our democracies. It's true that, and it was said, the war in Ukraine goes well beyond the energy issues. It's about freedom of nations. It's about also of economic prosperity, and it's also about social cohesion. But this war really showed our dependence on external suppliers. So Europe really must make an effort on that particular issue. We know that we imported the European Union imported around 40% in the last 6 years, 40% of Russian gas. So we really have to focus on that. Europe is responding with several programs, several measures. We have the Repower EU with a bet on diversification of supply, on energy storage, also on energy efficiency, and more recently we had a response from all the member states with their national energy saving plans. Portugal did the same. It was one of the first ones to present a complete and approved energy saving plans. It's true that it's there are volunteer measures, we have a volunteer target right now. European Commission and the International Energy Agency already said that the question, it's not really this winter, it's not December, that it's right on the corner, yeah. It's the next winter. So these energy saving plans that they're all aligned in the main in what are the main concerns, the main measures, and basically I think we are prepared for December, we are prepared for January, and then when I say we, I'm talking about Europe, because Portugal is of course more prepared than other countries because of the particular needs. But we have to think about what's going to happen next December. So that's the question. We have to see how these energy saving plans, how these strategy, how these measures from the European Union can keep in time, and we have to look to next December. So it's not a question just to reduce gas consumption till March, that it's the main idea, the initial idea. I think we should have to look to the next December and have a really bold strategy, not only for the short term, but only for the medium and long term. So considering December, not only December.
We're talking about the economics of the transition, and obviously I want to bring in the European Investment Bank and Antonio. Investment is such a big part of this. So what is the EIB doing to help the transition and to drive that goal for net zero in the EU and beyond?
Well, first of all, also thank you for the invitation. The EIB, perhaps we should explain what the EIB
sure.
is. It's a non-profit institution, and we deploy our resources basically and set our targets in line with what is the EU objectives. So all of even before the war in Ukraine, back in 3 years ago, back in November 2019, and aligned with the political ambition behind the European Green Deal, the EIB approved a set of measures that intended to increase the support to the green transition. So back in 2019, the EIB committed to increase the percentage of the lending volumes that we deploy every year to up to 50% until 2025. So that was an objective set back in 2019, and we are already there, even though just in 2022. And also we committed to, from 2020 on, to align all our activities to the goals of the Paris Agreement. So in the green transition and the support to climate action and sustainable development is at the core of everything we do. And more recently, and after the start of the war in Ukraine, again aligned with EU objectives, and after the Repower EU plan was announced by the European Commission, the board of directors of the EIB, was just recently two weeks ago, the board of October, approved also a package that intends to support a faster transition. Mm-hmm. So as you guys were saying, perhaps there are question marks on whether the transition is going to be faster or not, but we believe that this is the moment to actually support a faster transition. And in this set of measures, in this package that was put together by the EIB 2 weeks ago, there is a commitment to increase, on top of what we do every year, which on average per year over the past decade, 10 billion of our financing is dedicated to energy.
Okay. In the EU?
In the EU.
Okay.
So on top of that, there will be a further 30 billion over the next 5 years. So on top of what is recurrent financing, the intention is to increase such amount. And on top of this, additional loan amounts and equity investment as well, the EIB also approved a set of technical and policy flexibilities that change a bit of what we have done so far. For example, we usually the co-financing, we don't finance projects alone. We usually bring together other development banks, other commercial banks, other equity providers, and we usually go up to 50% of a project cost. In this set of measures just approved, we can go up to 75% of the total cost of a project, as long as it supports Repower EU objectives. So it can be any green investment, renewable energy, energy efficiency, EV infrastructure, power grids, for example, as well. So this is a measure that intends to accelerate the pace of investment. On top of that, we also approved the possibility to go longer in terms of tenors of our loans, and also to increase the upfront disbursement. So not only disbursing as the project is progressing, but actually upfronting disbursement so that promoters can go faster. So this is a set of measures that were recently implemented in order to support the Repower EU objectives and an increased pace in terms of the green transition.
Repower EU is going to be a recurring theme here throughout the day, and we'll also address that when we talk about green hydrogen and solar and how all of these renewable energies can complement each other and find a solution to decrease fossil fuels dependence as much as possible. A question to both Nelson and Peter. As far as energy agencies are concerned, how much are they working together, and really how much are nations working together in order to combat what both of you have said is the worst energy crisis in history? I don't know who wants to take it first.
So I'm happy to answer on the IEA side. So we've been working with all global stakeholders to accelerate energy transition, to put in place the conditions and the policies that you need to scale up clean energy. And so Repower EU is a very important part of that puzzle in Europe. So we've been working with the Commission, with President von der Leyen's team, from Kadri Simpson's team, to really understand what the scale of the challenge really is. So in our latest outlook, we say that somewhere around 65 billion euros a year is needed to transition away from Russian gas by 2027. Now that's a very, very big sum of money. And that's something where not only policymakers need to come together, but also the investment community, development banks, and so on. Indeed, yeah. So we'll talk after this. And so, what we say in our net zero by 2050 scenario, which reaches net zero emissions globally, you need international collaboration and support. And our executive director says that one of the major fault lines in this equation is the gap between what the advanced economies have said that they would do to help developing economies transition, to get away from unabated coal, to modernize their electricity grids, to scale up their renewables, and to ensure energy access as well, because this year alone, there's several 100 million people who are at risk of losing energy access in sub-Saharan Africa, which is something that we highlight as well. So it's a global problem, it needs global solutions, and that's why we work with all stakeholders to ensure that it's even remotely possible. So that's one of the key conditions of net zero, is international collaboration. The problem is that now, globally, things are looking a little bit difficult to secure that scale of cooperation. And so one of the issues that we face is the geopolitics of energy transitions. The fact that, there's concentrations of supply in not only in fossil fuels, but in the critical minerals that are required to transition towards an electrified energy system. And those are risks that we highlight with our partners globally in order to address a seamless transition to net zero, and not one that opens up new geopolitical fault lines.
Concerning energy agency, I have to say that they are all doing a great, huge job right now. The role of energy agencies right now it's critical. The example is that what I said before, it's the drawing of the energy saving plans, and in most of the cases, the implementation and the monitoring of those plans. In Portugal, it was ADEN that was in charge of drawing the plan. And now implement and monitoring the plan. But if we look to the 24 agencies that are members of the European Energy Network, that are then the Portuguese Energy Agency has the presidency this year, we really see a great potential of cooperation. That is already said. I think right now we have to boost this cooperation among energy agencies, because they are the ones that have the responsibility to implement political decisions. They have the responsibility to implement public policy that is critical in this moment. If we want to really to boost energy transition, if we want, and we need to do it, to boost renewable energy productions, I think energy agencies are critical for that job. And we really have to boost cooperation with these networks, such as ENR, that 2 years ago it was an unknown network among European institutions, and I think right now, with the job that we are doing with all the agencies, I think it's more known. We already had several studies presented also to the European Commission, some events. So I think that right now we are in a very interesting moment for energy agencies, for cooperation among the European Union member states. So let's hope that this cooperation, this need, this will to cooperate to do it, will keep in time, and in 1 year we're not discussing the same thing and saying that we need cooperation and we need to think on long-term strategies.
Lee, for GALP, I think there's a huge opportunity and there's a huge challenge at the same time, because you're front and center when it comes to that transition. What are your concrete ambitions when it comes to renewable energy and low carbon solutions, and how do you think you can get there? And obviously here we're talking beyond Portugal, because you're an international player as well.
Yeah, so we definitely are trying to diversify it as quickly as we can. I think it really starts with a fundamental belief that our strategy is based on a belief of an accelerated transition. So that's kind of the first important step for a company like GALP to realize. In terms of our portfolio, we are still investing in oil and gas at the moment. That's partly to recognize that where we are today as a society, we do still need this, and so the basis of our economy is hydrocarbon focused at the moment, so we do still continue to invest. But if you look at our investments between 21 and 25, we're already directing around 50% of our investments to the lower carbon fuels, which industry-wise it's quite a substantial amount. But in terms of what are we doing concrete in that space, so the first is a dramatic increase in renewable energy. So we're already the third largest solar producer in Iberia. We have about 1.3 gigawatts of production now. We're aiming to get to 4 gigawatts by 25 and 12 gigawatts by 2030, so almost 1,000% growth this decade. We're also already the largest EV mobility, so charging point provider in Portugal. And just this year we've become the fastest growing distributed generation solar provider. So we're talking about selling 8,000 to 9,000 or installing 8,000 to 9,000 locations with their own solar panels in Iberia to be able to self-generate. So that's really kind of in the clean electron space. We're also actively looking at how do we start to replace some of the more traditional hydrocarbon, gas and liquid molecules with cleaner molecules. And so green hydrogen, as we'll talk about later, is really starting to become one of the cornerstones of that future energy. And so our refinery in Sines, clearly one of the key industrial hubs in Sines, we're heavily investing in there over the next decade to convert a traditional oil and gas refinery into a clean energy park. And what we mean by that is replacing grey hydrogen, so replacing typical hydrogen that we use in a refinery with clean green hydrogen because we are already the largest user of hydrogen ourselves, so we can actually walk the talk and start to decarbonize our own assets. And we're looking at, as you said, to branch out. So we've just made a deal this year. We secured over 5 gigawatts worth of development funnel for renewables in Brazil. So again, for Galp, that's a major step forward in order to expand our renewable footprint.
Thanks for sharing that insight and also concrete goals and objectives. Antonio, you talked about big numbers when we heard from you earlier, 10 billion per year over the last 3 years, adding another 30 billion, I believe you said. For the next 5, thank you, not tomorrow. I wanted to ask you how you decide on these projects and what do you see as gaining more traction now, if it's solar, if it's wind, if it's hydro?
In Portugal or, well, in
I think
general?
you can maybe do both, maybe a little bit about Portugal and
I
then
will
what you
focus
see outside.
perhaps in Portugal, because some of the projects you just mentioned were financed by the EIB last year. So part of the solar portfolio that Galp is developing in Iberia was financed by the EIB. So it's one very good example of what we have financed recently. Also, the EV charging network was also part of another financing we did with Galp. So, I mean, since the early 2000s, we have financed a number of projects in renewable energy in Portugal, starting with hydro, wind. The first wave of wind farms in Portugal. The EIB also participated with a big chunk, especially during the crisis. We actually increased our volumes to close the financing gap that commercial banks were not able to in that period to finance. What we see recently is more solar. So solar is actually is a sector that is increasing a lot in general, but specifically in Iberia, not only with Galp but with other players. And we're talking about green hydrogen. I think the next panel will be talking about the subject. And what we see is an increasing amount of projects being announced. What we don't see yet is final investment decisions being taken. So I think in the next panel, perhaps the factors that are limiting that deployment will be perhaps covered. But I mean, the EIB, and what we can say is that we are keen to support green hydrogen. We see that as a very important sector in the transition phase. And recently, already this year, we financed Iberdrola in Spain, a smaller project, roughly about 50 million euro. But it was a green hydrogen plant dedicated to a fertilizer plant, so an industrial link. It included a 100 megawatt solar project with a dedicated transmission line. So a smaller project, but it demonstrates that we are keen to finance such sector. We see such sector as a key one in the transition, but we want to see more. And in Portugal, we are very keen to finance projects once they actually final investment decisions are taken.
Can I just pick up, I guess, linking the two? Peter made a comment around the minerals and the rare metals that we're going to be having. One of the things that I do think that we as Galp and other companies are starting to do is the new energy value chains that are being created, especially given what our experiences give in the Ukraine this year. We've started to pay much more attention to what are the critical resources in these new value chains that are emerging. So whether it's access to lithium, which is going to be a key part of batteries in the future, or whether it's access to electrolyzers in the hydrogen space, or access to solar panels that today are predominantly made in China. So I think companies as Galp, we are actively looking at how we can invest in certain parts of the value chain, potentially outside of the traditional production. So ourselves, for example, we're developing one of the first lithium refineries in Europe, where we would take lithium ore to be able to refine it to produce a product that could potentially then go into a European-made battery value chain. And it's those types of diversification of investments that I think we're all collectively trying to figure out how to unlock.
We're approaching a short break, but since we started a little bit late as well, I would like to ask each one of you one final question, and starting with Antonio. Within your area of expertise, if you could change one thing tomorrow to make the transition better, what would it be? And just a couple of sentences, 2-3 sentences.
I mean, We, as the EU Climate Bank, we support EU objectives. I think, you know, in some sectors, you know, again, going back to green hydrogen, I think if we want to accelerate the pace, perhaps one of the things limiting investment is the legal framework. Perhaps what we need is faster permitting processes in several countries, including in Portugal, and also perhaps incentives in the legal framework in order to make the life of financiers easier, at least in this first phase, you know, given the technological risks associated with the project, that we actually finance projects with support that we had in the past with wind and solar. And then as financiers get more comfortable with the technologies, some of those incentives, if created, then could be removed. So I think it would be that perhaps I would suggest as a measure to increase the pace of
incentives and the quicker decision making.
Yes.
You, Lee.
I won't repeat those. I think they're both valid. I think the other element for me is a continued focus on collaboration between business, regulatory / government bodies to understand how do the investments that companies like Galp are making, how can they be leveraged in the maximum way to improve the connectedness of these clean energies. So whether it's prioritizing those projects that can have the biggest impact on decarbonising and electrifying the grid, for example, I think we can be much more better connected between the parties.
Okay, Nelson?
I think we should guarantee an immediate response right now, but we cannot just leave behind the investments in the long and the mid and long term on energy. So we really need to boost the investment on energy. We need to boost the investment on industry, on new solutions, new technologies. We have to guarantee our future. We cannot just talk more about this in the following years. We have to do it. We need actions, concrete actions, and we need also, of course, to invest on families. We need to give them a quick response. So investments on energy, investments on industry, particularly investments on new technology, new vectors of energy such as hydrogen, and also, of course, invest on our institutions, because let's not forget our institutions. They are needed. Without them, we don't have any transitions, and we need energy transition. We need to boost renewable energy productions, and of course that we need all the private sector. It's critical, the private sector, but private sector and public sector really needs to work together. And for the public sector, we need more investment. And it's not a question of money. It's a question on invest on public policies, on the institutions. Okay, so in general, investment now, yes, but also on the long and medium term for private and public sector.
Okay, Lee talked about collaboration. You focus on investment. Peter?
They stole all the best points.
Okay.
So I'm last.
That's it then.
I can say one thing. Maybe just to keep it simple, coal. We have to reduce our use of coal, of unabated coal, because if we operate today's coal-fired power plants as they would normally be used over the 50-year lifetime, we would blow through the 1.5 degree budget, just the coal assets. So I think there has to be an unwavering focus in the advanced world on channeling finance and institutional capabilities and incentives for all those plants, most of which are in China, India, Southeast Asia, and so on, to be phased down as far as possible, but thinking about the just transition aspects of that. Because it's not just, we can't just come in with a bunch of money and close everything down. There has to be clean energy in its place, but really that's where the focus should lie, is on reducing the use of those assets.
Antonio, Lee, Nelson, Peter, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your experience as well, and concrete projects that you're working on and focusing on key aspects of this transition from different perspectives as well, which I think is so valuable. We're going to take a very short break, about 10 minutes, quick coffee break. We'll be back with the next panel, and in the next sessions we're going to be focusing on green hydrogen and solar energy, so stick around. See you soon. Vamos arrancar, ok? Hello, welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you there following us live on the stream of Outlook 2023, the Clean Energy Forum, and we had a very interesting debate on the economics of the transition in our first panel after an initial speech from the Vice President of the Municipality of Oeiras here. Now we're going to move on to speak about green hydrogen as we continue to focus on clean energy and renewable energy. And there's no question potential for green hydrogen to increase its production and its impact in Europe. Today it accounts for less than 2% of Europe's present energy consumption, and it is primarily utilized to produce chemical products such as plastics and fertilizers. But Repower EU's plan is an ambitious one to produce 10 million tons and import another 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen in the European Union by 2030, a giant leap from the 5.6 million tons predicted in 2021. There is definitely a new dynamic to H2 in Europe, and to discuss this source of energy and also to talk about what is happening in Europe and in Portugal, I'm delighted to welcome my three next guests. I'll start with Sérgio Machado, Head of Hydrogen at Galp, Duarte Lins de Faria, Member of the Board of the Ports of Sines and the Algarve, and we also have Miquel Lassa, Iberia CEO of EIT, InnoEnergy, and EGHAC. All right, gentlemen, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I've had an opportunity to conduct various interviews regarding renewable energy over the last months, and green hydrogen is front and center. First of all, maybe I'll start with Sergio, because I want to find out in broad terms to kind of set the stage, what is so special about green hydrogen and what should people know now from an introductory standpoint?
Yeah, thank you. We start by the fact that 70% of our emissions today are related to energy. So if we're going to fight climate change, if we're going to avoid this, we really need to start by that. And the reality, let's make it very clear, energy transition is mostly about electrification. We need to electrify everything that we can. And to electrify because we're going to use renewables in that electricity. But the reality is also that there's big sectors in our economies that cannot be electrified just like that, where the use of electricity will not be possible or efficient. And we have, on those, we can use green hydrogen for uses like in transport, for heavy duty, long haul, for maritime, for aviation that will not be able to electrify, for in industry, to replace the hydrogen that we use today, gray hydrogen with green hydrogen, but also for high-grade heat, where we'll not be able to use electricity to reach those kinds of high temperatures. And also for buildings, for climatization of buildings, where in some cases hydrogen will be an efficient vector. And that was the general framework that we had, was around energy transition. I think that from the 24th of February, one other thing very important happened, of course, which is putting hydrogen also in a way to guarantee security of supply and diversification of our sources of energy. And that's why we got, after that, Repower EU almost multiplying by 3 the target for green hydrogen in Europe. And you've mentioned from about 7 million tons per year to 20 million tons per year of green hydrogen by 2030. But for that to happen, for that to be possible, a lot has to happen yet.
And we'll get into what needs to happen, because when you talk about the transition and the acceleration in transition, Miquel, you're very much at the center of that, right? Because you have an acceleration center. So I wanted to ask you about the InnoEnergy European Green Hydrogen Acceleration Center, what it's doing on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to this event. Well, let me start maybe by saying some words about InnoEnergy so that people understand also the general framework and why we do and what we do. Well, just for you to know, InnoEnergy is a private company that was created back in 2010 as a result of a private and public partnership with the European Commission with the mission to accelerate energy transition through innovation and entrepreneurship. Okay, so we have been investing from back 2011 to today in around 500 early stage startups in the field of energy transition. 300 of them are going strong. And in that framework, back in 2017, we received the mandate from the Commission to lead the so-called European Battery Alliance, which is an industrial value chain initiative that was aiming to bring to Europe or to create in Europe a market that did not exist, which was the market of batteries and electric vehicles. Building upon the success of that initiative, we also decided to replicate that model in other industrial value chains that we deem are very relevant and strategic for Europe. One of them is the photovoltaics. I think somebody mentioned before in the panel before that we're importing most of the panels from China, and we want to change that. And the third one is hydrogen, green hydrogen. So in green hydrogen, we decided to take the very same industrial value chain approach, in this case with the support of breakthrough energies. And what we are doing basically is to try to accelerate industrial projects that are related to the hard-to-abate industries that Sergio mentioned before. We are providing basically acceleration services that are multidimensional, but basically aim to connect those industrial projects with off-takers that enable the bankability of the projects as soon as possible. In those projects, we are taking a full value chain approach. Maybe I will speak later a little bit more on that.
Sure.
And we are trying also to mobilize a full European ecosystem where we have like 500 industries in our ecosystem, industries like, for example, companies like Alp and other type of companies in the value chain to make that possible and to make this as successful and as you know, as fast as possible.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get into some of those ideas a little bit later in our conversation. Duarte, it's clear. There's no question that the port of Sines, and sometimes it's Portuguese, I don't know, Port of Sines, but Port Sines, there's no question it's very much at the center of the energy transition in Portugal. I think it's difficult to talk about this subject without bringing up the work that you're doing. But to those who are not as aware of what is happening and what has happened over the last few years, tell us the role of the port of Sines in the energy transition in Portugal.
Thank you very much. A special salute to the members of the panel and the organizers of this summit. Pedro, I think that the first way is to explain to everybody why do you need a port as a port of Sines to deliver the renewables in the future. This is very important because we are talking almost all the times in land, in pipelines, and so on. Yeah. But for us, it's very important to have our ports together in a connection with the center and the north of Europe. Why? Because we have in first hand, we have ships, we have LNG ships and ships that are able for carrying liquefied gases for exporting not the hydrogen itself, but hydrogen as a carrier, using a carrier. For example, ammonia, for example, other kinds of carriers that we can join, and then liquefy this product and export. Export why? Because at this time we have some ports, for example, Amsterdam and especially Rotterdam, that are able now to have a special role in the future for a hub for distribution this hydrogen for the center of Europe. And this is very important. This is the starting point that we have to make. Second point, we have in Sines, fortunately, a very wide area that is a logistic and industrial zones that is manned by ICEP. That is very important to be together with the plans of the port. Why? Because most of the plants, most of the factories that can settle over there, that can produce the hydrogen by the means that you want. For example, by solar, by wave, and by wind. And in that point, you can have an electrolyzer for doing it, and a storage, because it's very important two things in a port or in a way that you have a hub. First, have water. Second, have energy. Third, you have the ability to have the storage, and in this case for renewables, I'm talking about storage, the hydrogen. That's the starting, my colleague said something in Foster this way. We have started with the hydrogen, and the way for storing can be in different ways. At last, and this is very important, and I'm not talking so much of it, but it's very, very important, the interconnections. In the future, we have two hands. One hand is by sea, another hand is by land. But we have to have interconnections in all the ways, electrical and others, to support the center of Europe coming from the Iberian Peninsula. That's the way why you need a port, and in my case, the port of Sines.
I really want to go. I've never been. Mikel, have you been?
No, but
okay.
I've heard many times talk about Sines, and I was talking to him precisely. I mean, it's the epicenter of green hydrogen in Europe, I would say.
It really is, and you know, I think, and I was speaking with Duarte before we started this conversation. He's lived abroad for many years. I've lived abroad for many years, and when we come back and we see the potential that Portugal sometimes has to be a game changer in this clean energy transition, and when you speak about hydrogen. Maybe a question, I'll get to Mikel in a moment, but maybe a question for Sergio and Duarte regarding Portugal and the role it can play. Is it possible to be as ambitious as Duarte was saying regarding not only the port of Sines as well, but what can be built out from there?
Yeah, I think so. Sines is a great location for green hydrogen. And we are, I would say, Galp is really at the epicenter of this, because it is in Sines that we have the refinery. The refinery is it's the largest producer and user of hydrogen nowadays. And this is not only in Portugal. Actually, refining is the largest use of hydrogen worldwide, just followed by the fertilizer value chain. And what we're going to do in Sines is replace the gray hydrogen that we have with green hydrogen. Okay, and we are in a really good position because we have access to the most competitive renewable energies in Europe, both solar and wind. But we need to have that access. It's one thing that needs to be clear here, and I think it's an important point. So to make this gray to green in the refinery, what we'll need is about 600, 700 megawatts of electrolyzers. For that, we'll need a lot more megawatts of renewable power. And this is hundreds, up to 1,000 hectares of solar and solar farms and a lot of wind farms. And we cannot have that concentrated in one place. We will not be able to have all that around Sines. It would be too much of an impact. Of course, it wouldn't be acceptable. So we need electrical grids to bring that renewable energy from Portugal, from Iberia to Sines. This is absolutely key. So these interconnections are key. The electrical one, it's really important. And then, of course, we need to guarantee the principles that are being called on every green hydrogen discussion. We need to make sure that these renewables are additional. So this is new capacity that we are bringing to it. We are not cannibalizing renewables that are already in the market. Yeah. We need to guarantee some kind of synchronism, but we cannot be too stringent on these rules. Otherwise, we'll only delay the deployment of green hydrogen, we'll increase costs, and we'll lose this tremendous opportunity that we have, in Sines and in Portugal, and I would say in Iberia in general.
How much investment is happening as we speak now for that transition?
Let me say,
where is it coming from?
Especially when I'm talking about the most strong, I talk about Madocqua, and I'm talking about this is a Power 2X investment that is deal with a factory for producing ammonia. And in this case, I'm talking about 1 billion, okay? 1 billion in UK or United States with in numbers. This is the first way. The second that is very important is to be together with Madocqua is also a Copenhagen investments partners that has almost not only together with a special cluster, but is more European one. And there is another point that is very important. The Port of Sines is together being in a consortium together with the Port of Rotterdam, and together with some big companies as Vopak, Shell, Engie, and so on, in order to have a green corridor of hydrogen in near future. And the idea is the same: to have a plant, to have the electrolyzer, and then to have a storage and the ability for export with a ship in liquid natural gas, the liquid gas, whatever. In this case, ammonia, because nowadays with the technology that we have now, it's too difficult to carry the hydrogen in liquid state in an open way, because it's too difficult, because the liquid hydrogen, you can only afford the liquid temperature in about 250 degrees Celsius. That means that only a small part from the absolute zero. So it's too difficult for carry directly the hydrogen. So this is the basic investment. But I can add Antonio a little bit, because we have an idea, not in our jurisdiction area, but in front of us, about 12 miles, floating wind platforms that in the future, this is not our jurisdiction and the responsibility direct of the Portuguese state, in order to have farms just over there for producing in the future about 2 gigawatts a year. So there is another way for adding the wind that you need, but not at land, but by the platforms. We have a pilot, let me say, the Portuguese state, as a pilot near Viana do Castelo, that are working very well, and the idea is having more floating platforms in order to produce not only energy by solar. There is a problem because the area is very big, but also to profit the wind, and let me say, the tide and the waves that you can join together in a platform like that.
You're a great promoter.
I'm not. I'm telling about what I'm feeling. Let me say.
But I can see the best promoters are the ones who are passionate about what they're saying. Mikel, one question, 2 parts. Give us concrete examples of some of the companies that you've helped accelerate and the impact that they're making or that they can make, and then talk to us a little bit about, and then the others can get into this conversation as well, but the importance of the technology, how important technology is and advances in technology, and feeding and accelerating that technology to allow the transition to be efficient.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, regarding the first part of the question, let me say you all know, I think, that now green hydrogen-related projects have a premium. Everybody's talking about the price of hydrogen, whether it is 3, it is 5, it is 7 euros per kilo or whatever. We are taking a little bit different approach in the projects that we are supporting, and I think we are supporting we are being involved in one of the biggest projects that are being launched in Europe. And what we are trying to do is to have a full value chain approach. And when I talk about value chain, we are not stopping at hydrogen, but we are going further downstream in the process. We are talking about projects that are producing, for example, green steel, or are producing green fertilizers. And what we typically do is involve all the players in the value chain as investors in that project. Why? Because we want to share the risks, we want to share the benefits, and we want to be transparent with them about the margins and the real price and the real cost of the final product. So when people ask, if you ask me what is the price or what is the cost of the green hydrogen in our projects, my answer is, I don't know. And honestly, I don't care, because what I do care is the price or the premium about the final product. I think Duarte was talking about ammonia and other kind of products. Just to give you an example, we have some projects. One of the projects where we are investing is H2 Green Steel in the north of Sweden. And this company is already raising substantial amount of funds to make the first plant viable, and this first plant will be producing 3.5 million tons of green iron in Sweden in 2026. And I know in that particular case, the green steel that is produced per ton is 200 euros more expensive than conventional steel. It's 20% more expensive. But what we did in that project is involve from the very beginning companies that are interested in decarbonizing their final products. Give you an example. Automotive companies like Mercedes or Scania for trucks, they are interested in, beyond decarbonizing their drivetrain, sell to their customers a product that is fully decarbonized. And when they do the analysis and they say, okay, for my Mercedes car, which is 30,000, 40,000 euros at least, 200 euros more for the car is something that my customer is willing to pay. And we are doing the same with, for example, with fertilizers. We have another project that we hopefully will announce beginning of 2023. We are involving also food companies. We are involving food companies that are at the end of the value chain, that they want to reduce their scope 3 emissions. And for them, it's very important to say, okay, I'm producing my beer, my biscuits, or whatever, in a fully decarbonized manner. When they do their analysis, the premium of that cost increase because of green hydrogen is really small. In some cases, it's 2-3%. And they are, by doing that, they are decarbonizing maybe 20% of the emissions related to that product. And that is the approach that we are trying to take. You were speaking about, technology.
Technology, yeah.
Of course, technology is very important. I mean, in these early stage projects, we are taking this approach, and maybe we are addressing premium markets. For the future, of course, we expect, with all the investment and all those first industrial cases, that technology will evolve significantly and costs will be reduced, and that this approach that now works for premium products would be also available for all type of products, and we will reach our objective of net zero in Europe by 2050. That is a little bit the approach.
I have a final question for all of you, and I'm going to come in here as a consumer. Okay, when I think about the mass transport and the carbon footprint that it has, whether that's aviation or maritime transport as well, and the opportunity that's there to clean the way in which obviously energy is produced for those methods of transport. I get a little bit concerned or worried, like how does the transition work? How does the technology work? What message do you have regarding, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong as well, Sergio, that recently TAP did the first flight with green hydrogen, correct?
No, with sustainable aviation fuels.
Okay, thank you.
Which is, so.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. But the question, and you can start, is when this transition happens, how important is it to inform the consumer that everything is fine, and that the kind of awareness in one way, but then gaining the market confidence to make these changes?
I think, yeah, sure. So these changes are coming both from both sides. Many of these changes are coming from regulation.
Okay.
So you have regulation coming, which is setting some mandates, some targets, some minimum amounts of clean energy that you need to put in these sectors, like transportation. Now, what you have now in Europe, it's Renewable Energy Directive 2, RED 2, called RED 2, which already puts you mandatory targets of renewable energy that you need to bring to your mobility energy. And this is what is being discussed in Europe now, which is the revision of this RED 2, some call it RED 3, that is bringing these targets higher and introducing some special mandates, not only for general renewable energy, but some types of energy like green hydrogen. But you also have what Michael was telling us now, and the example of what we did recently with TAP, which is volunteer movements from companies. And you have that, you were mentioning about Mercedes, but there's a lot of other companies that are demanding that their value chain is decarbonized. So, and also touching on what Bart was saying is, so I think it's good that we connect and Sines and the Iberia on this hydrogen move to the rest of the world, and we create the opportunity to explore the potential of Iberia and export green hydrogen and green hydrogen derivatives. But I think that we also have a great opportunity in Iberia, which is using this very competitive green hydrogen. I think that in Iberia we have all the conditions to have the most competitive green hydrogen in Europe.
Okay, that's a bold statement.
It is, but it is. I'm perfectly convinced of that, and that comes from the fact that we have mostly the cheapest solar energy in Europe. So we must take advantage of that. But to use that, like many other countries have used that in the first industrial revolution and then the other second, and which is using the cheapest form of energy, of the energy that we need to use now, this energy for the energy transition, to make our products. So I like projects, and I know that Michael is involved in some of these. We have been approached and we are working actively on these, which is, there are companies that are willing and wanting to decarbonize their process, and they're coming to us, to asking us how can we help them on that. And what we are saying is come and bring your plants to co-locate with us, and we'll deliver to you the green hydrogen that you need for this transition.
Okay. Finally, Duarte and Miquel, what is your message regarding the market confidence and regarding this change of energy that a lot of people may not know that much about?
I think that we have to be focused in two ideas. First of all, in my idea in the port, we are trying for a new strategic plan to have 3 Ds. What we mean with the 3 Ds? Decarbonize, digitalize, and diversify the markets. And I add something, markets with confidence, that they are reliable, especially when you are talking, for example, from energy, from raw material, and so on. These are the 3 things that we have to look forward. And the second point that is very important, I have listened carefully my colleagues, but in maritime transport is my experience, and I can say that we have some taxes that we have to apply to some fuels that are the fuels that are fossil and so on. And now the Commission has committed to have a plan, to have a road map, to having different situations for the next years. That means that each ship will pay depending on the amount of the fossil fuels, or it means for the renewables that is going to blend with the actual fuel. And for us, for example, in maritime transport, the problem is not the kind of machinery that you have just over there. Is the ability for each port as the capacity for supplying the right fuel in the right time from each ship. And it depends on the changing of the fuel of each ship. This will be now in force in the European Union, and we are looking forward for, the reason is the maritime transport is international. You have to agree in International Maritime Organization, that is IMO. The center of IMO is in London, And IMO is also responsible to have a compatible system on the fees for the transition in the future. And it means, is my experience in maritime transport and for shipping. And also having it ship what we call on power supply, that onshore power supply. That means that each ship, especially the cruisers, when arrive to a big city, to have the ability to connecting by electrical and stopping all the generators.
Gotcha.
Because this is a problem with emissions that you have in the big cities. These are the experience that I have and I add to my colleagues.
Final quick word from you, Mikael.
I have to apologize, Pedro, because I didn't hear your question.
So if you can repeat it. Just what message do you have for the market during this transition to make sure that people are confident that it can happen and they feel safe while it's happening as consumers as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the consumers we do have, an issue, and it's not new. It's not from this year or last year. We have been trying to also work in that respect, because at the end, in some markets, the consumers play a very relevant role, and are the ones that should be demanding this kind of product. Of course, progress has been done, but it's difficult, and I think unfortunately the war with in Ukraine and it's helping to pass that message and to make people more aware that I mean, one, security of supply, which was always mentioned in the trilemma, was relevant, but was somehow forgotten because we were never suffering the consequences of that. But also sustainability is extremely important. And for me, there's a third message that has been somehow connected here. I would say, especially for Iberian politicians, for Iberian people, my message would be: we have really a great opportunity to bring industry to Portugal, to Spain, because this is, I mean, we have all the ingredients to have a real renewable energy hub, and not only produce energy, but also bring industry that requires cheap and sustainable energy. So for me, that would be the message. So let's work really on accelerating permitting and working to bring these industries and bring this talent to Spain and Portugal to make that a reality and reinforce our economy.
You've convinced me.
You've convinced you.
And we have to talk to Duarte to go and visit the Port of Sines at some time.
My dear colleagues, to say that let's go in practical what we are doing there. And I think that both you and everybody knows that can share and can foster what we are going together. Yeah. And especially with my friend of Galp, because the old times that we spent, and we are fostered together, because the Port of Sines is not alone, it's international too.
Yeah. Mikael, Sergio, Duarte, it was a pleasure to have this discussion with you. From green hydrogen, we're going to shift gears and talk about solar in just a couple of minutes, so stay right there. Literally going to be 2 minutes to switch over the panel, and then we'll be back. See you in 2 minutes. And we're back. I said we'd be about 2 minutes. I think maybe it was 2 or 3, I'm not sure. But as promised, we are here to speak about solar energy and focusing on that particular area of renewable energy and the transition that is being made. And it's quite a pertinent topic, especially here in Portugal, considering that we are in November. It is sunny outside. So we do have an advantage over a lot of countries. And I can tell you that from living in London for 7 years, sometimes I used to go 2 or 3 weeks without seeing the sun. So I really do appreciate it. I want to introduce you first, then I'll talk about the general context of the topic, and then we'll get right into the discussion. So it's a pleasure to have with us here Carlos Relancio, Head of Renewables at Galp, Pedro Jorge Amaral, President of APREN, that's the Portuguese Renewable Energy Association, and also Wolfram Sparber, who's the Vice President of EUREC and Head of Institute for Renewables Energy at EUREC Research as well, and we'll get into your role in just a minute. I did want to set the scene here for our discussion because solar is very much at the center of the Repower EU strategy, and there's a huge potential to be really a key player in the acceleration of that transition. And according to the information that I was seeing, there's really a plan to reduce, obviously, the dependence on Russian fossil fuels, and to focus on renewables and increase it from 40 to 45% of all energy consumption. The increase of photovoltaic panels and capacity is also very much a topic on the agenda, to increase that by 2025. And I'll let you gentlemen, because you are the experts, really focus on the details. But Carlos, maybe I'll start with you, and let's focus on what Galp has been doing and is doing, because here we did have already a conversation on renewables overall. Then we talked about green hydrogen. Tell us about solar.
Okay, thank you very much, Pedro, and thanks for the invite to be here. Galp, as today it has been clearly stated, is not only about renewables; it's about many other activities that we are running related to our activity in hydrogen, to our activity in low carbon hydrogens. So the commitment of Galp is that we are investing 50% of our capex in the energy transition, and 30% of the total capex is only for renewables. Okay. 3 years ago, the presence of Galp in renewables was almost zero, and today we have 1,300 megawatts in operation, which bring us to be the third biggest solar operator and solar producer in Iberia. So this is a reality. This is happening today. It's not a PowerPoint. It's not something that is a promise. Yeah. It's something that today is happening. So there is a very big commitment of Galp to doing that. Also with the mind of an industrial operator. So there is a lot of people that has been onboarded in Galp in the last 3 years, even in the middle of the COVID crisis, to run this business, from the traditional industrial point of view of Galp taking care of the details and trying to add value. So I think this message is very important. We are looking also not only to Iberia, we are expanding also to Brazil. Next year we will start our investments of our plants in Brazil also. And as I said, today we have 1,300 megawatts in operation. Our target, committed target, is to be in 4,000 megawatts in 2025 and 12,000 in 2030, which is very ambitious.
Yes,
very ambitious, very aggressive, and of course with a combination not only of solar but also adding some wind projects.
Pedro, I had the pleasure of speaking with you a few weeks ago.
Pleasure was mine.
And we obviously already delved into this topic, but it's great to see you again here, because we've talked a lot, even today, about Repower EU and the role that solar has to play, and we've talked about concrete measures and dates and deadlines. Just to open up the conversation as well from your side, are the goals of Repower EU realistic, and what is solar's contribution to making that happen?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. Solar is definitely one of the technologies that's going to be the basis of the energy transition for the base load of the electrical consumption. When the Repower EU was set, this is after the invasion of Ukraine, there is an intent to actually replace part of the fossil fuels with green hydrogen, and the only way that you can get green hydrogen is through renewable electricity. And the two main sources that you are going to get to actually have renewable electricity to produce green hydrogen and then synthetic fuels from non-biological origin, it's actually through solar and wind. Now, solar and wind, all over Europe, they have different intensities and different base loads, but in Iberia, I think we are fortunate, as you saw from the weather today, that we are actually fortunate to have a huge amount of hours, and that can help us going to a base load with wind and PV, with solar, and actually try and satisfy the demand of power and energy. I think the measures of REPowerEU, more than if they are realistic or not, they are demanding, because we are moving into a space where renewables and basically PV, we need to remember that 10 years ago, PV would cost around, let's say, 400 euros per megawatt hour. And in 10 years, we are on the range of 25, 30. So we slashed it down from 10% of what it costs. So we are now replacing fossil fuels, not only because it's environmentally friendly, but because it's also economically competitive. And now it can lead us to energy independence and security of supply. And so the portfolio of renewables that comes from the measures and the goals that was set by REPowerEU are in a way that I think the Iberia economy as a whole is going to benefit, because we are the region in Europe that, with a portfolio of renewables, most benefit from the amount of capacity and the amount of hours of that renewable source. And fortunate, we are the cheapest ones in solar. And if we don't do anything dramatically wrong about interest rates and inflation, I think we'll be sustaining ourselves as the most competitive one with the levelized cost of electricity for PV. So yes, I think the targets are achievable. More than achievable, I think they are mandatory to move in that direction. I'm not really concerned if we get there 1 year earlier or 1 year later. That I don't think that's actually the point. The point is to put the train in motion. And once it's set, the inertia is going to take us there. It's going to take market players, operators, consumers, industrial consumers to make sure that this energy transition moves forward, and we completely make ourselves not relying in any of the fossil fuels coming from Russia.
Yeah. Wolfram, first of all, I'd like you to share a little bit of the work that you're doing on a daily basis with EUREC, and then talk to us about some of the challenges that you see from a EU perspective, because we've heard people here be very confident from an Iberian perspective, but from a EU perspective, what are the challenges there to direct more effort and more success on the solar energy supply and impact?
So, thanks as well from my side for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here to discuss with you. We are an applied research center, and I'm involved in the Association of the European Renewable Energy Applied Research Centers. What we do is to drive innovation, to bring new product, new systems, work on high efficiency of systems, driving down cost, and allow that to work out, obviously together in close cooperation with smaller, larger, very large companies. So this is what we do on a daily basis. We do this in European projects, we do this in bilateral cooperation, we do it in the institute which I'm heading on energy efficiency in buildings, in heat pumps on the thermal side, we do it on PV integration in buildings, on PV integration in systems, on getting more kilowatt hours out of every megawatt which is being installed. I myself did my master's thesis once, many years ago. I studied applied physics in PV, and I remember very well that was around 20 years ago. A PV system cost around 45,000 euros for a single family house, okay? And I remember at that time talking to people, they said, this is a waste of time, what are you doing? This is good for a satellite, this is good for a mountain hut, but it's nothing for anything else. And now we are seeing where we arrived. We arrived much further than even the sector where I've been working in for many years ever believed we could reach, to be the cheapest, in many countries, the cheapest the cheapest electricity source which is available. And this is the path we have to go forward. So what I see what we have to do is to be very fast in implementation, and we had it already in the panels before. I think democracy and bureaucracy is a big, so bureaucracy and permitting is a big obstacle in being faster, in bringing
across
megawatts
member states
and gigawatts on the ground. We see it in Portugal, but I see it a lot in Italy, where is the country where I'm from. I see big discussions in Austria, big discussions in Germany, where more gigawatts are being installed. Nevertheless, it is a topic. It is a topic for solar, it is a topic for wind even more because it's more impacting, but as well for solar. And we have, and I think this is, with all the tragic side that Russian invasion in Ukraine showed us in Europe, we should see this as an occasion to say, look, we have been living in a system which turns out not to be sustainable and not to be stable. It can't be that one of the strongest economies of the world is struggling because one man decides to turn down a gas pipe. So this is just not possible. Yeah. So we have to invest in our own capabilities to produce cheap energy and to have value chains in place. And coming back to the innovation part, and this is with which I want to close, I think it's important to have mass deployment on the one hand, but on the other hand as well, go on in innovation. We saw this driving down of cost and enhancing of efficiency in 20 years' time. We're just kicking off a European project with many big partners in the next couple of months about the next step in efficiency increase. So a solar cell usually has now around 20% of efficiency, and we see the chance that we bring this up to 30% of efficiency. So 50% more on the same surface, on the same amount of technology, and with a little layer of a tandem cell, so taking a traditional cell and putting a second cell on top. And obviously, if you look at these steps, that allows you again to do a further increase of what we are talking, driving down cost and getting more kilowatt hours out of the surface which we have available.
You know, most of the articles that I read and most of the insight that I get regarding solar is that the argument regarding the efficiency and the price is already there. It's been won, but storage is a big part of this conversation, right? So, how is that going? And it's a question to all of you. You can all pitch in, please, from your different viewpoints. But how fast is the technology moving in order to be able to increase storage dramatically, so then it can be solar energy can be massified and be a major part of the grid?
I always like to say that in solar we won already the race of the cost. As we were saying, so solar is the most competitive source of electricity in the world. So even in some years ago, it was necessary to have, when there were auctions in some countries, it was like technology separated because it has to protect the technology. Now solar can go to any auction anywhere. It's always beating any other electricity. So this is the first. So the second battle is the storage, as you are saying. So we have a question of how we are going to manage the cheapest source of electricity. We were in a very good, let's say, the learning curve, the decrease of the cost of solar has been huge, as Wolfram was saying, amazingly, and Pedro, amazingly huge, with a reduction in 10, 12 years of 90% of the total cost of installation. The speed that the storage system was coming, the learning curve, was even higher than the solar. So we were on a path that the cost of the storage was going down faster than that. Unfortunately, we face these disruptions, first with the COVID, second with the war, and unfortunately now this curve of this tendency is not there anymore. But what we see, what we believe is that the storage is absolutely a must. So the level of penetration of intermittent renewables, either solar or either wind, in a system, there is always a limit because you need some stability in the grid to fit. So one day there is no wind, one day there is no solar.
Exactly.
Okay, what do we do? Okay.
Exactly.
So then you say, okay, according to my portfolio mix, then okay, we cannot have more than 50, more than 60, more than 70% of what is called intermittent generation technologies. Yeah. With the storage and with the deployment of storage, it's possible to increase that level. And today, this is something that all the companies, for us, it's absolutely clear that all of us, we are thinking in already installing storage, not only in our current plants, but I see that no more, let's say in the next 2, 3, 4 years, all the plants are going to come already with storage. It's the only way. It's the only way to grow in the independency and also to face all this revolution of electrification, all this path to electrification of the economy.
Okay, I wanted to get.
So, and if
Yeah, please do.
Let me take just a little further. So we have mainly in Iberia 3 storage mechanisms that we are going to use. One is hydro dams, which you can reverse pumping and use electricity when it's cheap and put the water from a lower level to a higher level and do the turbine process again. You're going to have green hydrogen because our levelized cost of electricity is very low, and then you're going to have batteries. And you're going to have 2-hour batteries and 4-hour batteries on standby. And all of these 3 storage systems are going to be the ones that are going to massively be used to balance the supply and demand at every point. But the interesting part here is that what storage is going to allow us, especially on batteries and probably on hydro also, is energy shifting. So if you have all of the solar producers on a very sunny day producing to the grid and you do not have enough demand for that, with storage, you can actually capture that amount of power, and instead of having 0 economic value, it starts to have an economic value. And that's how you're going to finance the storage systems. And there are a lot of beliefs and myths that you can be producing electricity when there is no consumption. That's a physical impossibility. We have a physicist here. It just doesn't exist. So you can only produce electricity when you have consumption. If you do not have consumption, the system cannot produce, otherwise frequency will go up and you will collapse the system. And so storage is going to be that way that we are going to have different types of storage. There are moments where we're going to have an imbalance for 3 minutes. There are moments that we're going to have an imbalance for 3 hours, and there are moments where we're going to have an imbalance for 3 days. And for each of these imbalances, you're going to need a different technology of storage. So the shortest times will be supplied by batteries, mid-term hydro, and then the long transitional storage needs to be done through either green hydrogen or synthetic fuels of non-biological origin.
I know you wanted to jump in here as well.
If I might add something.
Please do.
We, in the last years, at the beginning, we focused a lot on single technologies. And at a certain point, we were discussing in my research department, but how does it fit all together? So we said, okay, we need to really see the overall energy system as a whole and go deep in order to understand how this transition can work. So we started working on simulations, taking single regions or whole countries, taking the whole supply, consumption, the transport sector, taking the industry sector, taking the heating and cooling sector, the electricity seeking, breaking down hour by hour and see supply and see demand in order to understand how the transition is going to go, run through thousands of models with different supply scans, wind obviously produced when wind is there, solar produced when solar is there, in order to see how much batteries do we need, how much hydrolyzers do we need, and so on and so forth. And what we see in these models, running through these models, there's one thing of the batteries which has not been mentioned, but we see a lot in our models, which is the batteries which are coming with the cars. So if we decarbonize our transport sector, we've got to have a lot of batteries distributed over the whole grid. And these are big batteries, much bigger than if you do as a single person, you buy a home battery, that is one size. But if you have a car, an electric car, you have more or less 8 times that size in your garage. And you don't pay that because you buy a car, but the battery is included. So if you have the possibility to do smart charging, and in future to go a further step to vehicle to grid, you have really a big balance which is in there. And that is quite easy because the customer is going to charge his car when the electricity is cheap. And when electricity is cheap, there's a lot of electricity in the market. So it's a self-compound. So the fact that Galp, for example, is investing on the one hand in renewable energy, but in the other hand as well in charging infrastructure makes a lot of sense.
Pedro, when it comes to European funds, obviously the investment that is coming from continental sources is very important. Do you think that these funds are being well used, well utilized? What's your feedback?
There's one thing here, and allow me 35 seconds just to mention 2 facts. One is all of the renewable energy investment, at least in Iberia, is private investment. It's not state or public investment. These are companies taking the risk of going out in the market and making the thing work. The only thing, between brackets, as an only thing that the governments need to do is create a stable regulatory framework to make sure that all the investors that want to put money in this, either through equity or debt, have a vision of 20 to 15 years how this is going to behave. Now, what we need the funding for is actually to those technologies that are still on we call the technology readiness level, not commercially deployed. Let's say green hydrogen might need some support to CapEx in order to make it, let's say, more attractive to investors to reduce part of that risk. Now, the other funds that are going to be needed, I think it's about supporting more the demand than actually the supply. What the supply needs is a clear legal framework, very clear rules of engagement, making sure that governments are not creating a windfall profit tax or are generating a new tax, because taxation on the energy and power sector goes almost to 50% with all the small little things that are added to this. And so I think the funds need to be actually supported for, let's say, technology that it's pre-commercial deployable. And when I mean pre-commercial deployable, is it banks are not yet believing in it, so you need to create what we call an offset guarantee to make sure that they can test the technology, and this needs to be done through those funds. And of course, you know, you are going to support and need to support vulnerable consumers in the energy transition. And you need to use, in my opinion, part of those funds to go net zero. And that means increasing the possibility of people using renewable power or renewable fuels. And this is the way where, in my opinion, the European funds need to be deployed. There are actually conversations now that the funding part that come from the resilience and recovery plan can also be used for the energy transition in some slots, and we need to see how the Commission will come up with those rules. But from the supply side, these guys and their competitors, they've been doing this with their own money all of their lives. And so this is not public funding, this is private investment. And so when we are talking now that renewables saved the electrical consumers 2.6 billion in Portugal in 2022, that's from private investment, that's not public money. So that's the system, because the majority of the wind and PV producers are selling to the grid at a much lower cost than the market is paying, and that difference is injected again into the electrical system, and that is what it's allowing for consumers to not increase their electricity bills. So this is not about the state doing this, it is private money doing this.
I don't know if you want to react to that as well, because obviously Galp has been at the center of that.
I have to support 200% the words of Pedro. There is no other way, and yeah, because this is sometimes a myth, and that the support to renewables, and at the end of the day, and the regulatory, the stability of a regulatory framework is absolutely essential. You know, some years ago I had the opportunity also to be in countries which today are have a very high level penetration. And the guys and the government was telling me, but how we are going to finance the renewables? And I said, you don't have to finance anything. You have to give a steady, you know, clear rules of game.
Yeah, the legislation, right, to be able to support it. Yeah.
And then the investors will come. There is no need for that. And also, what it's good to understand is that, you know, now unfortunately the prices of electricity are very high, and you know, and we are suffering, and the government are making all these movements. But this is not going to last forever, and it has never been like this. So the scenario of prices that all the investors are managing absolutely is different from what we are having today. So it's good that, you know, and we are here to invest and to support the good times and the bad times. Yeah? And we are here, as Pedro was saying, with an investment of 15 to 20 years, at least minimum, because the returns are small. So we are saying that. So this is a long run. This is not something, and of course Galp, the investment of Galp and the spirit of Galp is being a long-term investor in renewables. So we are not, as I said before, we are an industrial player for creating jobs and creating wealth around this.
Wolfram, I wanted you to tell us what current projects you're working on, or you can share with us that at URAC research that can really change the landscape and be innovative.
No, for example, one where I was telling, we are a lot focused on overall systems and overall system efficiency. And there one point is to make sure to get the best out of a system which is in the field that is possible. And we did several projects with big partners like TÜV Rheinland and others, where we examined thousands of tickets where maintenance has been done on PV systems. And what we see is that PV systems are running well, but they could run a little bit better. And if you have gigawatts of systems like Galp has, to have 2 or 3% more output, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that is sufficient. So we are working exactly on that field. How can you use drones? How can you use communication between drones and inverters in order to do fast scanning of PV fields, in order to see which kind of modules are not working 100%, which kind of strings are giving problems? How can I adapt that before seeing a certain part breaking completely down? Because if it's broken, okay, then you see it. But how can you really squeeze out the last part of it in order to make it happen? So that is one example of the PV field. A completely different example, just because we were talking a lot of gas. Gas is used a lot as well in the heating sector in Europe.
Of course.
In Italy at least, it's strongly dominant, but I think as well here in Portugal it's used a lot. There we are working a lot, and this is somehow connected to low temperature district heating grid. So how can I reuse heat which is coming out of supermarket, which is coming out of data centers, which is coming out of industries, but it's not super high, in order to bring it through heat pumps and low temperature district heating grids to other appliances, taking cheap renewable electricity, transform it in heat, but use an efficient heat source, and don't waste the heat where I'm wasting it at the moment with a certain cost, but actually reuse it in other applications. And there we see grids, and we have applied projects going on in France, in Italy, in Rotterdam, in Germany, in Sweden. I would be happy to see some as well in Portugal going on, where we use low temperature sources like ports, for example, like coal mines, like cooling centers for hospital cooling systems, and so on, in order to bring it back to heat quarters which are nearby.
I guess as we wrap up our conversations, I still have quite a few questions, but if I could maybe put all of them in one, it would be, what are some of the best practices that you think exist in the European Union now? And what message would you have to the legislators? Because it's really come up a lot, the decision making, the regulations, in every panel really. So what message would you have for the governments to ease a lot of the pains and the pain points that you have on a day-to-day basis? And I can start with you.
So I would start saying, on the one hand, really permitting has to be fast and clear. I think what industry wants is not a lot of money, but is clear surrounding conditions and fast decision. And we need now fast deployment of a lot of renewable energy, and especially solar. That is one side. If I can talk about innovation, we need there a clear innovation framework, and I think there the European money helps a lot, and the national money helps a lot to really put it in applied research in order to see new products and the new European value chain to come up in the next years, in order that the growth in future is as well a European-based growth, European companies, European welfare.
Okay, it's clear.
Well, I think we need to criticize the government, but we also need to compliment when they are doing the right thing. And we had a new legislation package at the beginning of 2022 that was published, that was developed by the previous, or the same Secretary of State with the previous minister, that is creating a legal framework and a huge amount of possibilities in the Portuguese legislation that are now being copied by other countries. Okay. And without going into very technical jargon, I would say that hybridizing wind and PV is something that we already allow. Having the possibility of having the network bidirectionally functioning to make sure that we are not on a paradigm where we have a power station just supplying, but you have all the economy supplying and consuming electricity. That is also predicted. Standalone storage is also predicted. So there are a lot of things that were good in our own legislation. What we are lacking is that we are still looking at the entities that need to go through license and permitting with the same glasses as we were 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And this needs to change. We have competent people, we have the organizations that we need, but we need to have more people, modernize the organization, create new processes for licensing and permitting, put web systems where everyone knows what's happening, because if we don't speed up licensing and permitting, and again, the people that are working there are doing their best, but they are the same for a huge amount of projects that are coming now, much bigger than it was before. And this is something that we need to do. And we also need to involve the municipalities in this, because at the end of the day, our wind farms and our power stations for PV, all of them are not going to be installed here or in Lisbon. They are going to be installed all over the territory, and municipalities need to be able to have an economic development gaining from this also. Okay.
Final remarks from your side?
Again, fully agree with what Pedro is saying. And I would like to highlight two topics and to add one. The first, regarding the people, absolutely agree. So there are not enough resources in the administration, and even more in the local administration, to handle and to manage all the projects that are coming to the table. And this is, they do whatever they can. The civil servants are doing whatever they can, but it's not enough with the avalanche of projects that they are facing. This is the first. The second, regarding the new legislation, I would like to give an example, which for me, and you know, I am proud of this example. With this new legislation package that was approved in Portugal, a very concrete event. Galp, we make a mechanical completion of one plant in Portugal. 5 days later, we were injecting electricity to the grid. 5 days later. Just a comparison, wow. In Spain, the minimum period for this is 2 months. And today, with the current situation, we are seeing averages between 4 and 6 months versus the 5 days in Portugal. So I think this is something that we have to be proud, and we have to complement the result of this, which really what it makes is speeding up the connection and the interconnection of renewables to the system that decrease the dependency on fossil fuels and the best finally the cost. And the last point that I should say, maybe not only for legislators, is that, but I think that this is a debate that it's coming now, but it's something that it should be good to highlight more, is about interconnections. Pedro was saying before, we have the best LCOE in Portugal of all Europe. Does it make sense to make PV in countries where they have 900 hours of sun per year when we are having 2,000 hours, when our cost of electricity of producing solar here is half the cost that they are there? And the only way to do this is through interconnections, to have a real single market of electricity in Europe, which unfortunately today we cannot have. And to have the opportunity that from a Portuguese plant, we can be selling electrons to a Dutch company or to a German company or to a Norwegian company. So, and this could solve many problems and could accelerate the problem of the dependency that today we are having in Europe.
I saw you react quite a lot, so I'm going to give you just another minute if you want to.
No, I think this is exactly the point as well in the stabilization of Europe. And this is what we see as well from a renewable platform. We are stable because we have different conditions, different sources which complement each other. But if there is no grid, this complementation cannot be, because everybody is dependent on the source which is there. But if we have a grid, then it works well. And we can stabilize, lower the cost, and give a support to our industry.
Okay.
And just to finish up, we need to identify the elephant in the room, and we need to recognize that France has about 70% of installed capacity by nuclear technology. Yeah. And I understand there are a lot of sunk costs, and they are usually committed to that technology. But this is the European Union, and so we need to actually increase the interconnection capabilities for electricity, also for natural gas, in order that Iberia also, because in due time they have liquefied natural gas terminals that can export through a pipeline. But at the end of the day, all of the capacity that we are going to have from PV, and keep in mind that we are the last ones in Europe to run out of sun in the winter. So all of this, if we do not enough consumption, a lot of European countries could have that consumption, and we need to reinforce interconnections for that.
Thanks for that, gentlemen. Wolfram, Pedro, Carlos, thank you so much for sharing your insight. Really insightful conversation, not just this panel, of course, but all of the panels which we've had here today. We talked about the economic impact of the transition and how that can be sped up. We also talked about renewable energy overall, focusing on green energy and green hydrogen, and then lastly on solar energy as well. So we would like to thank all of the speakers who are here with us today. Also thank GALP as a partner, thank the municipality of Oeiras as a supporter, the sponsors, and of course this is such an important initiative by Jornal de Negócios, Sábado, and CMTV to make sure that this topic is very much front and center in the media agenda. From my side, from our side, it's goodbye. Look forward to seeing you very soon again at the next event part of the Electric Summit. Thank you.